Hello, today is October the 2nd, 2019, and if you're here for powerful strategies for keeping your technical content fresh with Joe Gelb and Megan Gilhooly, you are in the right place. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Scott Abel. I'll be the host of today's show. I'd like to invite you to attend our upcoming conference, Content Strategy Applied, which takes place October the 29th through 30th at PayPal Town Hall in San Jose, California. You can check out the roster of outstanding presenters and grab some tickets today at contentstrategyapplied.com. And speaking of tickets, 3 lucky participants on today's webinar will be selected to receive a free ticket at the end of the show, so stay tuned to see if you are a winner. And speaking of winners, we're looking for presenters who are winners, who have challenged themselves in the world of information development and perhaps taken on some projects that would lead for our upcoming Information Development World Conference, which takes place in beautiful Palm Springs, California, February 25th through 27th, 2020. If you've got ideas for presentation, we'd like to hear from you. You can submit an idea at informationdevelopmentworld.com, and at the end of today's show, we'll give away a few free tickets to this conference as well. All right, a few things to know really quickly. We can't see or hear you, which means we don't have access to your camera or microphone. Chat is one way, meaning that if you were to use the questions from the audience function, you can submit a question to us, but we can't submit a text answer back to you. And we're recording the show, which means that if you return to this same URL that you're using to watch this live show, about 30 minutes after the show ends today, it will magically turn into a recording, and you can watch it on demand or share that link with other people, and we hope that you do. Also, if you've got any kind of challenges, take a peek in the attachments and links section of your webinar viewing panel, where you can find some information on how to overcome common audio and video problems. Here's what you can do on today's show. You can ask a question by using the Ask a Question tab located under your viewing panel. Again, it's the chat room. That is one way, so you can send those questions to us. I'll queue them up at the end of the show and ask as many as possible with the time allowing. Also, you can answer a poll. We'll project some questions on the screen with some instructions on how to answer them. They're just quick and dirty polls to help the presenters better tailor their presentation to you. So definitely be on the lookout for those. And you can access additional content in the attachments and links section of the webinar viewing panel. There's usually a copy of the slides and some content provided by both the organizers, the sponsor, and the presenter of the show. So definitely check that out. And before you leave, if you'd rate the presenter, we'd really appreciate it. We use a 5-star rating system, with 1 being a low rating and 5 being a high. The presenters always appreciate getting feedback. And speaking of feedback, I'd like to give some feedback to thank our sponsors today, which is Zoomin Software, in case answers to your users whenever and wherever they need them. They've got an intelligent platform that takes all of your product content, no matter where it was created, and surfaces it up as personalized and easy to find answers across any customer touch point, including your documentation center, your service portal, online community, or even within the products that you designed themselves. You can learn a lot more about the offerings from Zoomin Software by visiting them on the web at zoominsoftware.com. All right, today's show, we're going to talk about keeping content fresh and relevant, especially technical content. And let's talk to our presenters and introduce them to you today. So first up is Joe Gelb from Zoomin Software. Joe, are you on that line?
Hi, Scott. Yes, I am.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. Where are you broadcasting from?
I am broadcasting from Tel Aviv.
From Tel Aviv. Well, I know you've been traveling. Must be nice to be back home. We also have your compatriot, Megan Gilhooly. Megan, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here, Scott.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. It's been a long time since I've seen you in person. It's nice to hear your voice. I hope you're doing well. Where are you broadcasting from today?
Same. From Seattle.
From Seattle. Oh, excellent. Great. Well, I'm going to let the two of you deliver the presentation. I'll put myself on mute. And just a last-minute reminder for the viewers who are just joining the show, you can ask a question at any time by using the Ask the Questions tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. We won't text you back an answer, but I'll queue them up at the end of the show. We'll ask Megan and Joe as many questions as time allows. All right, I'm going to put myself on mute.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate that. All right. strategies for keeping your content fresh. And I just want to point out that for us, if you do a search on Google and you check out fresh content, you're going to get hit after hit after hit that is specific for SEO. We're not going to talk about SEO today. SEO is important, but it's not the final end game for product content. So we are going to redefine the way we think about fresh content today. And we are going to focus on a definition, and then we're going to learn the benefits of fresh content, and most of the benefits are eliminating the risks of stale content or mitigating the risks of stale content. We'll talk about how our tools that we have at our disposal can help us with our fresh content. And then we'll try to understand the reciprocal relationship between content freshness and personalization. Before we get into that, we have had a poll question up, and we have a number of people who have already input, but you have another, say, 30 seconds to make your selection to determine what level of effort is required to update and maintain your technical content. So far, we're looking at 55% medium content, 45%, medium effort, 45% high effort. So definitely no low efforts out there.
Right.
Seems
yeah.
like
When we talk about we talk about updating and
Joe.
maintaining content. It's about often we think about writing that content and getting feedback and making that content, the content itself, updated, but very often just getting it out there so that the updated content is in front of our readers. Often that adds into the effort to keep that content maintained.
Right. And it looks like high effort it's neck and neck. It's back and forth. So we're definitely almost 50-50 between medium effort and high effort. So very good.
There we go.
All right. Let's carry on. All right. So let's define content freshness. And in my mind, content freshness has 4 criteria. The first is it needs to be up to date. Now with SEO, of course, recently updated is important. We're talking about something different than just recently updated. Certainly recently updated should be up to date, but you can also have some older content that you've checked over time that you know is still up to date, and it could still be fresh even if it was published a long time ago. So it's important to make that distinction. The second criteria is timeliness, and this is really like the newsworthiness of it. This is how trendy it is in the marketplace today, or how much people are talking about it in your industry, or how much your customers care about it today versus 6 months from now or 2 years ago. So the timeliness of it. The third one is pertinence. If something is pertinent, I mean pertinent to that specific user. And this is where we get into sort of the personalization that Joe will tie to content freshness towards the end of this presentation. But if something is pertinent to a person, that means it's relevant to where they are in their customer journey, where they are in their life, where they are in whatever they're doing. It's relevant to them right now, not just relevant to the entire industry. And then the last one is it presents something that's new or different. So you could have somewhat old content that you bring back to life by adding new insights or adding a different level of detail that wasn't available the first time it was published. So these are the criteria I look for content freshness, and we'll use these criteria going forward. Let's talk about the customer impact of stale content. So we know when content goes stale, there ends up being a lot more content out there because we haven't deprecated the old. We just keep adding new content, new content, new content. This can have a customer impact of having just too much content, too many options for customers to wade through. And that can be really frustrating for customers. There's also the risk that the customer will find the wrong information. Now, they might know it's the wrong information, or they might not even realize that they got the wrong information. Either way, this can be highly frustrating and not lead to a great customer experience. And lastly, when you have a whole bunch of content out there, some of which has been updated and some of which hasn't, there's inconsistency. And inconsistent content can be a really, really big trust buster for customers. And so this is something we obviously want to avoid. So those are the customer impacts of stale content. There's also business risks. So we have low customer trust, low customer satisfaction. These things go down because of the customer impact that we just mentioned. It also means that we have higher support calls. We might also be scrutinized by competitors and analysts. And I'm going to give you an example of that particular one because it's a little harder to sort of visualize. I worked for a company once where Gartner came in and was doing their yearly check on what features this high-tech company did and did not have. And they came back and said that we didn't have a feature that indeed we did have and we had had for a year and a half. And so when we went back to them and said, well, why did you give us a lower rating on this particular feature? They said, well, your content suggests that you don't have it. And so we had stale content that was suggesting the wrong information, and Gartner took it and ran with it. And so that was a really big business impact that stale content gave us. So of course, with fresh content, we want to turn these things around. We want to increase customer trust, increase customer sat. We want to decrease support calls and decrease any scrutiny that might come. So we know that product content in particular crosses the entire customer journey. And it's important to know that freshness of content is important at every point as well. If you have a weak link in, let's say, marketing content or some other part of the customer journey, that weak link will lead to all of the risks we discussed. So it's really important that the entire organization, not just the product team, not just the marketing team or just the support team, all of these groups need to work together to ensure that you're presenting fresh content across the entire journey. This is an example of what I consider to be really good fresh content. This was something that was surfaced to me on September 18th. And so when I look at the date, this was published on September 5th. And so because it was published recently, you would kind of think, yes, it's up to date. And it also was updated the very next day. And so this gives me a pretty good feeling that this is indeed up to date. The topic of this article, vaping, this is something that is definitely trending today. Of course, there are a lot of health concerns about vaping. It's all over the news. So certainly we can say it's newsworthy or timely. And because I'm a mom of 4 kids who are nearing teenage years, vaping is highly pertinent to me. It's very relevant. In fact, I've had 3 conversations about kids and vaping in the last week. And so this is something that is definitely on my mind. And so it was surfaced to me very purposefully. The other thing to notice is this last line where it talks about this investigation that was done in New York where they're linking vitamin E to vaping. And this is something that was sort of a new or different take. This investigation just happened. And so they were able to add new or different information. And so that really adds to the freshness of the content. Now, certainly this is not product content, but we can use some of the same characteristics when we look at product content. So when we look at this particular product content, we have a date at the top. It's an updated date, so we know when it was updated, which tells us whether or not it is likely up to date. We also have a featured content section. Now, this featured content section should be a section that dynamically generates suggested content that is timely for today as well as pertinent. And so while we don't know if we have new or different information here, we do know it's up to date, and we have a section where we can present timely and pertinent information. Now, if I knew more about this topic, I could tell you if it's new or different. I can't because I don't know enough about this particular product, but I would presume that they're suggesting something if they just updated it on September, early September, can't see it, that there's something new or different here. So that's an example of where I think you can really use your delivery mechanism to showcase how fresh your content is. So in talking about fresh content, I want to bring up freshness versus popularity. And this is important to sort of juxtapose these two things, because we could have really old content that no one is reading. So stale content that is really not popular. We can have new content that's being read a lot. We can have very popular content that is stale. And then we can have really popular content that is also really fresh. And when we look at these quadrants, I think it's pretty obvious that old content that no one is reading probably needs to go away. There's not a lot of value in really stale content that is really unpopular. But when you get to everyone reading old content, so you have stale content that's really popular still, it's a little bit tougher to say whether you should just deprecate it or whether you should update it or whether you should maintain it. You really have to look at these pieces of content. And I'll give you an example. There was a company I was at one point. We had product content that was for version, let's say, 6.0. And we were currently on product version, let's say, 8.0. And customers were coming to us complaining because the 6.0 version of content was ranking really high in SEO. It was coming up #1. And so then customers would click on that, and then they would have to navigate through to get to more recent versions. That was super frustrating from a customer experience standpoint. But when I went to the gal on the SEO team, she was really hesitant to get rid of that content because it was ranking so high in SEO. And of course, she's gold on how high this stuff ranks. And so we had to really look at that as an issue and say, well, what should we do with this? Should we allow people to access it? Should we not? Is it still supported? Is it not supported? So there become lots of questions when you have really popular content that is stale. And the same thing sort of happens when you have really fresh content that doesn't immediately become popular. There are many reasons why it might not be read. Is it that people aren't finding it? Do you need to market it more? Is it that it's not surfacing in search? Is it, why is it that people aren't reading it? If you thought it was fresh, and it turns out it's really not timely, and it's not pertinent to the people that you're writing to, then maybe you got it wrong, and maybe it needs to go away. So these require further thought. And of course, the content that's fresh, that becomes really popular, we've really hit the nail on the head there. And so we want to make sure that the majority of our content lands in that quadrant. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we have a lot of tools at our disposal. We have metadata. Now, while this isn't a tool literally, we'll use it as something in our toolbox that we can use to help us present fresh content. We have a component content management system or another CMS that we can use that will help us understand our content, when it was created, where it's linked to, all kinds of information that come from that. And then we have our delivery platform. And together, these three things work really, really well to ensure that we are delivering the freshest content. And so when we look at delivering fresh content, I have 5 characteristics that we're going to dive into. The first is dynamic delivery, analytics, subscription, automatic expiry date, and immediate feedback from users. And we're going to dive into examples of these. So when we look at this page, we notice on the right-hand side, there's a related content section. If you just have static related content, then it's sort of useful, but maybe not really, really useful. If you can have dynamic delivery, meaning it changes not just based on the context of the page you're on, but it changes based on the clicks the user has made. It changes based on the time of the day, the location, the whatever information you have about this particular user, and you can dynamically generate that list of related content, you are much, much, much more likely to deliver content that would be construed as fresh. Analytics. Of course, analytics help us. It's very difficult to get really, really good and actionable analytics. But if you can get analytics that tell you how old your content is, or how often people are actually finding answers through your content, then you can start to bring together actionable insights that will help you to deliver fresher content. So subscription is a great way to get more information about your user to ensure that you're presenting pertinent information. So in this case, someone can easily just subscribe by clicking a button at the top. Presumably they could unsubscribe by clicking that button again. If you do use subscription, you want to make sure you have detailed subscription management, because there's nothing more frustrating than someone signing up for a subscription to content that is relevant to them right now, and then 6 months from now they're in a totally different part of the customer journey and they want to unsubscribe and they're still getting bombarded with notifications on it. So definitely you want to dive into subscriptions, but you need to make sure you have good subscription management as well. All right, so if you do understand content aging, if you do have the ability to pull a content aging report, that's great. Now, wouldn't it be cool if your content could automatically expire at a certain time, whether that's 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever it is you set. If your content can automatically expire and you can set what happens when it expires, that's a great way to be able to control the freshness of your content. So let's say you decide that when it expires, you want it to automatically unpublish, and you want it to send a notification to a specific email or kick off a JIRA ticket or some indication to the team to say, hey, this stuff has gone unpublished because we're not sure it's still fresh. You could also just decide to leave it up and just send the notification. But an automatic expiration date is a super cool way to ensure that you're maintaining fresh content. All right, so sending feedback. We know that this is, well, let's pretend this is up to date. It's a bit of an older date, but you can tell by the updated date when it was updated. But if your consumers think, you know what, there's something wrong here, or it's not quite as fresh as we think, we want to hear about that. And so we want to give them an opportunity to present feedback. And you can do that in a number of different ways. For example, binary, you can do yes, no. You could do thumbs up, thumbs down. My personal opinion of a binary rating system is it really works well if you're Pandora and you're trying to determine whether you should send more or less content like this. Then the binary works really well. I've done a lot of testing on this and I've found very little actionable results coming from yes, no, but it depends on your content and it depends on your users. So just really look into that. You also can have a 5-star rating. You can include a place for them to write freehand. You can ask for email. You can even sort of describe what those stars mean in a little more detail. It's really important to understand, though, if you ask for feedback, you need to do something with it. You have to take some sort of action. One of the biggest trust busters that I've seen in my career is when we've asked for feedback and maybe even an email, and then nobody gets back to the person. Next thing you know, you have support tickets coming in. I put in this feedback, no one got back to me. So don't ask for an email address if you don't have somebody ready to respond to that email. And don't ask for feedback if you're not ready to respond to the feedback. So that's important to note. But if you are ready and you can get back to them, this is a great way to ensure you get immediate notification when a customer finds something that might not be fresh. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joe to talk about the reciprocal relationship between personalization and fresh content.
Great. Thank you very much, Megan. So we're going to talk a little bit, take it another step forward. Megan spoke a lot about the content freshness and keeping the actual text of the content or the content itself to be updated based on analytics, based on about what people are looking at, based on feedback. I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how you can keep the experience of the content fresh based on making sure that our content is lined with typical user scenarios, user stories, as our content is evolving alongside our products, what that means and how that how that shows itself and manifests itself, not just in the text itself, but also in the overall experience. So what we see here is really like an interface here, where we have a doc portal, which is not just a doc portal, but it allows people to get started with the particular product through the use of technical content. And we see here is that the folks who put this site together use an instructional design method to really figure out like what is the role of the people who are accessing this content frequently, and what are the type of people who are using the products, and what they need to know in order to get up and running as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, they need the most updated content. They need the content to be accurate, but they also need the content or the experience to lead them through a set of steps and lead them to the type of know about to save their time and just get them up and running as quickly as possible and as smoothly as possible. So as content practitioners, as folks who are not only just updating the content, but also keeping an eye on those user stories, like, what's the role and the goal in the context of the people who are coming to the site and the content that they need to access and need to read in some kind of an order in order to get them to be up and running as quickly as possible. So we can use the same type of methods that Megan had mentioned about the analytics and feedback and things like this, but it's also really keeping an eye on those user stories. A lot of us are part of organizations, our R&D organizations that are using, sprint-based or Scrum-based. They're using Jira, for example, to create user stories based on those stories, the product is evolving and the product is developing. And a lot of us as technical documentation experts and writers and communicators are using those user stories as the basis for updating the content. That becomes very important, not only for the updating the content, but also to keep updated with typical scenarios of how people can get up and running quickly. Now, very often what happens is that, and you guys know better than I do, is that it takes more than one topic of information to get someone up and running. Very often there needs to be a flow, okay? And being able to show a flow of this is what you need to know, from beginning to end to get up and running, where I had seen like a map or a flow of different content sources that I may need to see. Now, these content sources may be in disparate places. They may be in different types of guides, or they may be KB articles, they may be learning modules, they may be videos or tutorials. The idea here is being able to bring together different types of content resources based on the freshness of what we know about our users and how they need to get up and running as quickly as possible to really create that experience. Okay, so here we're talking about this idea of pertinence and personalization, not just in the content itself, but in the presentation and the flow of that content. What we see here is an example of a personalization functionality where, based on the personalized view of what versions of my product I'm using, which features I'm using, or whatever it may be, however you would define your metadata model, allowing somebody to get in and say, you know what, I, as an end user, I'm most interested in a particular product or a particular version, or this is my role, okay? And by allowing folks to explicitly state their preferences, it also allows us to provide a personalized experience. That personalized experience provides a more pertinent experience and really gets them to the most relevant and updated content as possible. And this goes through also answers to what I was saying before, that it's not just about the content, the text, but it's also about like how are we tagging that content, making sure that our metadata model is evolving alongside the products themselves and what we know of how people are looking at content. It allows us to optimize our SEO, the keywords that we're using, the synonyms that we're using. Okay, and that's all part of the freshness. It's about the text, it's about the SEO, it's about the synonyms, it's about keywords, metadata, taxonomy, and again, all boils down back to this, typical user scenarios and understanding the roles and the personas of people who are using the content in order to use our products. Now, what happens often in these types of mechanisms is that once I've set my preferences, either explicitly through through functionality like you see here, or a system that allows me to learn based on either my single sign-on token or metadata that we know from our CRM system, being able to proactively provide that personalized experience and lead the customer, the users to the content they need, as well as being able to proactively personalize the search weighting based on what the customer is most interested in seeing or most likely interested to see. What you see here is another example where, based on this type of personalization or based on that type of personalized search experience, the search results can be personalized as well. So you're seeing two things here. On the one thing, you see like a drop-down like filter. So here it says Kingston, but if I were to click on that, then you would get a list of facets. Kingston is the name of a product or a product version. So as I'm navigating through a site, very often I would expect that that site would understand my preferences or understand what is pertinent to me based on how I'm navigating to the site. If the site is already, as I'm navigating, if the site already knows what's pertinent to me and it proactively sets those search criteria, then that enables me to have a much more effective auto-suggest or auto-correct type of auto recommendation of the search terms and the search topics that might be relevant. And again, this all plays into not only the freshness of the text itself, but also the freshness of my understanding of who's coming in there and the keywords and the roles. So I'd like to pass it back to Megan.
All right. Thanks, Joe. So what are we going to take away from today? First, fresh content is up to date, timely, and pertinent, and offers new or different insight. Very important. Fresh content reduces the risk of low customer sat and trust and high support calls and scrutiny. Or said differently, fresh content can hopefully increase your customer satisfaction and trust and reduce. Your tools should include mechanisms to help maintain fresh content. So really look to your tool providers to make sure that you're getting what you can from them to help you maintain freshness, and make sure you look into your metadata to understand how that's helping you drive freshness. And lastly, as Joe talked about, personalized content feels fresher and fresh content feels more personalized. So there is a reciprocal relationship there that works really, really nicely. Mm-hmm. So with that, that's the end of our slides. And if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the question box.
Excellent.
We have one
go ahead, Joe.
Sorry. No, I'm just saying, I think we have one question here regarding the fresh. Megan, you had showed on one of your slides about on the right side, it had featured content, and the question is regarding like how that featured content can become fresh. What we often see is that content can be, or those related content can also become more fresh based on metadata. So as you're keeping your metadata model fresh, and you're able to, like Megan said, to be able to use the characteristics of the page as well as the characteristics of what we know about the person who's surfing or person who's coming and looking for the content, we're able to put those together to really deliver that personalized experience of bringing that content, the most pertinent content right into that box, whether it be featured content, whether it be related content, whether it be related KB articles that might be coming from a support portal or from related posts that are coming from a community portal. But the freshness of content across the spectrum of tech docs, KB, knowledge articles, communities, our metadata models and on the principles we're talking about here really can be used across all those different silos to bring all that fresh content into one pane of glass.
Excellent. All right. Well, this is Scott. I jumped back on the line, and I've got a question for you. And I would like to encourage the audience members. I've seen that our audience has grown since the start of the show. So for those of you who may have joined us late and might not know how to ask a question, you can use the questions tab located below your webinar viewing panel to type in a question, and I will read aloud some of those to the audience or to the presenters and see if we can get them to answer in the time remaining. We've got a little bit of time, so why don't I open up with a question I have. This one is for both of you to think about and discuss. It seems like Joe pointed out that the content flow is really important to the trust factor, right, of the visitor to your content, especially if you're serving up pertinent content suggestions. That's a good thing, right? And it builds trust. But shouldn't we also have to worry about, as content creators, shouldn't content creators understand how the flow of the content is possible to flow so that they can make new pertinent discoveries and make, as Megan pointed out, the content more fresh by, for example, finding a new way to spin it or some connection to a topic. In other words, what about behind the scenes for the content creators, the people who are on the webinar today? What will they need to understand in order to do a good job at that? Let's suggest I have a brand new technical writer joining our team, and let's say we've already established this personalized technical resource center. And how do we explain it and show the journey that we've built for people to the people who are responsible for making future content journeys and future pieces of content?
Megan, do you want to try that first?
Do you want
me to take us? Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think there's a couple components to that. I think one of it is based on, as I mentioned before, I think more and more teams that we've seen anyway are thinking from a instructional design point of view and say, listen, we have a lot of content out there, and there's different types of people who are accessing. There's like newbies, people who are just getting on board. I'll back up one step. There's people who are prospects, and they want to know, wait, geez, how quickly is it going to? How quickly is it going to? Can I get up and running with this product, right? So there's prospects, there's newbies, and then there's people who are kind of up and running with the product, and then there's people who are really doing more high-level integrations. The people who are who are newbies, then the instructional design approach really is useful, because instead of just throwing all this content over the fence and saying, here I'm doing a really good job of my topic-based content, answering one question with the topics and all that other jobs, but how can I string together a list of content that I know that this person in this particular role needs? And it could be that the journey for each person, depending on the role, would be different, even though the content might be the same. Meaning that I can present the same content in different order, or hide or show content based on that particular role. So I think that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer I think that we've seen more and more is that the solutions are getting more and more complex. We're talking about converged solutions, or companies are buying other companies, a lot of M&A, and people are struggling with companies, and as well as writers across different teams, or writers who are part of cross-functional tech doc teams. Like how I try to create some kind of an overarching story about how all these products fit together. It's really hard. I think part of that is like from a taxonomy point of view, trying to understand the typical use case scenarios about how people are using these products, but also how these products fit together, how they impact on each other, and really, kind of trying to get an arm around a process of creating and maintaining that types of cross-functional taxonomy I think is helpful in in driving this this more personalized content based on how I'm implementing these products. I hope that made sense.
It does. I guess what I was getting at was when you showed the visual of the content flow, it was a little easier for my brain to process. I had like a aha, oh, from this step to this step to this step. The similar I had a similar feeling when Megan showed the customer journey as that squiggly line with those different stopping points right along the journey. And I just thought, wouldn't it be good for us to try to figure out how to visualize that content for the people creating the content too, so we can see typical journeys that people have taken and typical solutions that we've conjured up for them.
Right, and that's where analytics often comes in, because analytics you can see what people are searching for. That's pretty obvious, but you can also see what people are, how people are clicking through. People how many seconds people are staying on the page. Are they clicking around because they're not finding what they're looking for, or something's useful? Right. Are they clicking and they stop, and then they start then they're clicking much more mindful or much more, I guess, effective, right? And you can use those analytics to really get an idea of how hard is it for people to find their starting point, of what's useful for them, right? So I think analytics provides through the pathing, what we call pathing, the path people take, as well as like what people are searching for and how long they're staying on those pages before they move on.
It's a big topic, as you pointed out earlier. There's so many changes happening with all these different company mergers and acquisitions, and people acquiring new technologies and capabilities that they've never had before. All of a sudden, they have new duties and responsibilities on the content side that they might not have anticipated. So I think that's important. Megan, did you have anything to add to that particular part about visualizing for the people creating content so they can better understand what we're trying to accomplish?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the one of the best things that the content industry has done for itself recently is this idea of structured content or micro content, and the idea of really bringing your content, your topics down to consumable bites makes it a lot easier to pull them out and stick them into different places. That also helps you to deliver things like different paths through a smaller segment of topics. It helps writers visualize because they're using a content management system that will tell them exactly where this particular topic is going to be used. And it helps keep freshness because you update once and it just automatically updates everywhere it lives. So I think that's another mechanism that writers can use in particular. It's not necessary, but it definitely makes things a lot easier, along with the taxonomy that Joe talked about and the pathing and all that.
I think that's great. And audience members, if you've got any questions, feel free to submit them using the Ask Questions feature located in your webinar viewing panel. Here's a question from an audience member. Do either of you have suggestions for metric assessment content in the Freshness popularity matrix?
That's a mouth talking about.
I'm not sure I know exactly what they're asking.
Yeah, I'm assuming that they're talking about a little bit about the training, training type of content where you're doing assessments of how people are doing. Do you get the same?
I'm not sure. If the audience member wants to submit some additional detail about the question, please feel free to do so. Another question I had was, when is it best to do all of this work? One of our Twitter followers wants to know, is it best to have structured content already in place and then try to figure it out, or should we try to figure out the relationships and then build the structured content that we need?
Yes to both. It depends on the content, right? You kind of have to do both. You have to start somewhere. So you probably, if you already have unstructured content, you need to know what to do with the unstructured content. If you have structured content, you need to start there. So you really have to figure out the journey you're going to take. And I'm not sure if they're getting at how do they get into structured content, or if they're getting at how do they assess freshness based on having structured and unstructured. But it really depends on the content.
That's a good question right there. How does the system handle, if we're actively encouraging people, which we have been for years, to adopt structured content, then how does the system handle both unstructured and structured, and why would we want to do that, Joe?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the reality of the situation, definitely for the companies that we work with, the vast majority of the companies that we work with have both structured and unstructured content. And a lot of that's because, there's a lot of legacy content that hasn't been migrated to structure. So it's just practically that's what happened. But when the system is able to digest topics of content and provide a good search around everything, whether structured or unstructured, then you're still able to get a good experience around the content and a good search experience around the content, even if it's not structured. There's definitely a lot of benefits you can get around structured, and Megan mentioned some of them. But having unstructured content definitely does not preclude having an excellent experience around the content and having that mashed up really along with the structured content. I don't know if you meant this or not, Scott, but there's unstructured, there's structured, and then we're seeing more and more like API documentation, which is even more structured. It's even more fresh often because that documentation is often written right inside of the APIs themselves, right? So that kind of is often very fresh and it's often very structured, and a lot of companies are moving to that. So we're seeing mashups between Swagger content, which is very structured API documentation, along with maybe data content, which is providing some background information, along with like legacy, legacy FrameMaker or all kinds of other Flare or other kinds of unstructured type of content, which provides a lot of other kinds of content around use cases and other types of content, other types of the material. So we see that very often.
That makes a lot of sense. Megan, there was a question earlier where somebody was asking about trying to learn lessons from outside of TechCom, and that you had referred to, yes, this example I'm showing you is not a technical documentation, and this person basically said, have you any other things that you think we should be learning from outside TechCom that we could apply to TechCom if we just thought about our technical communication as customer experience, which is a little different than I make a document and then I'm done.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yes, absolutely. I think I've done a lot of my learning, even though I come out of TechCom, I did a lot of my learning through content marketing, because there was a time when technical documentation was boring and dry and marketing content was engaging and fluffy, and we sort of learned from each other. The marketing folks learned that they had to be more purposeful, and we learned from them that we had to be more engaging. And so there are a lot of things that we can learn from marketing content. I think some of the API stuff that Joe just mentioned, there are certain things that developers are doing, and if you have a highly technical audience, then your technical content has to take some cues from some of the stuff that developers are developing for themselves. So yeah, absolutely. I think you can take influence from lots of different places. And the one I brought up was, just an article, but it was certainly it just kind of jumped out at me as something that was a really good use case for Freshness.
Perfect. I do have a second follow-up from the metrics question earlier. So here's the second attempt at trying to ask this question. So here we go. Do you have suggestions for metrics collection and analysis that could help me locate our content in the Freshness popularity matrix?
So oh, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll check. Okay, so a couple of things that come to mind. Number one is that the relatively easy thing is, what content are people clicking on? So if you're using Google Analytics or something similar, then you can find out page views and how popular pages are. So that's relatively easy. Where it gets a little bit more difficult or more challenging is the opposite, where the system needs to know, not just what content people are clicking on, but what content is in the system is not getting clicked on. So Google's never going to know that. You really need the delivery system that you choose needs to be able to give you that data and say, listen, here's all the content that's in the system, that's been published into the system. This is how old it is, meaning keeping track of the last updated date, both from the topic level as well as the whole publication. And then be able to do a cross-section between that and and what people are not looking at. So so if you see there's content there that is that's there and it's old and it's not being looked at because no one's clicking on it. So that's what you can do. That's where kind of the delivery mechanism, as well as like the typical Google Analytics type things, that really come into play. There's also the idea of the searching. So there's a lot of people, the search metrics, like what are people searching on? But what's also very important is, well, if someone searches for something and they don't click on anything, or they search on something and they click on it and they stay there for like 2 seconds, they don't read the content. That basically means that people are searching for things and they're not finding what they want. And so that also, doing a cross-section of search analytics and time on page, and how updated the content is, putting those 3 metrics together can also provide some insights, which are useful. Megan, how would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think another metric that is super helpful is one that tells words what synonyms are not being searched for, or like they'll bring up a word. Let's say they search for the word, I don't know, virus, and they find no content. We want to know that they're searching for that word and finding nothing, because then we can take that and go, oh, well, we really have stuff about diseases, so we need to add a synonym of disease to virus. And so we know how to sort of change our synonym list in order to surface the right content. I think that's another good one to help ensure that you're moving the needle on that matrix.
Right.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you for answering that question. I think that was a good stab at that. Do you have any other advice, Megan, coming from your previous work at learning lessons about content from outside of TechCom? I know you started to dive into content marketing for a minute. What did you learn at a high level from content marketers that you might not have picked up from the TechCom sector?
So I think a lot of the way that we deliver content is different. Obviously, we know it's different than the books we used to produce. And so as everything sort of moved online and everything came together, we learned that it's important that someone's saying they can't hear me. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Don't read.
Okay, good. Okay. All right. So the way that we deliver our content online certainly is different than how we did it in books. And I think a lot of, especially those of us who were technical writers, many, many decades ago, we like to think about specific things like, well, we have to have specific features in our PDF documentation, and we're sort of stuck on those features. And I'm kind of failing to think of one right off the bat, but there's a number of different features that we had in PDF documentation that you just don't need anymore, right? And so you have to really think about your content and whether those sort of stagnated features are necessarily things that you need to bring from your books into your online content, or if you can actually get rid of them because they're really not useful and they're just stuck in your head because you've been in this industry forever.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. There's a difference between something that we do because we've done it by tradition, and so we're accustomed to it, habit, and we're wired that way. So we gravitate toward the easiest thing, and then deciding to make a change because it may inconvenience us to have to learn something new or develop a new approach, but it will serve our customers better. And I think in the end, that's what we're after. So thank you for sharing that. Right,
absolutely.
And thanks to our audience, too, for joining us today. I appreciate your time dedicating to our webinars here. We hope that you'll share this recording. The link will become, that you're watching the show on right now, will become a recording about a half an hour from now. You can share that with other people. But before you leave today, I hope you'll rate the presenters by using the Rate This tab under your webinar viewing panel, and let the presenters know how valuable the content was that they presented today. And speaking of them, let's thank Joe Gelb, who's on the line with us, and Megan Gilhooly. Both of you, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
It was awesome to have you, and thanks to Zoomin for being our sponsors. And for those who joined late and might not know, Zoomin helps you get more value out of your content by turning it into personalized and easy-to-find product answers. To make sure that the most relevant content reaches your users where and when they need it, why not schedule a live demo with a Zoomin expert? You can arrange this by clicking the Request a Demo link in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel. And of course, I recommend checking out their website, zoominsoftware.com. There's some great archived content there, as well as some recordings from previous webinars where Joe and other members of this team have participated in shows in the past with us. You're definitely going to want to check those out. And speaking of recordings, we have over 250 of them available for you to watch on demand in the Content Wrangler channel and Bright Talk. And if you'd like to submit a proposal to speak at a webinar in the future, or if you've got a suggestion for a presenter or a topic, I'd love to hear from you. Check the attachments and links section of your webinar viewing panel for instructions on how to submit content to us. I'd really appreciate your help and your ideas. And here's a few tickets we're going to give away. First, a Content Strategy Applied. Winners of around $2,000 or so entry to the conference are Laura Reed from Log Me In. You've got a free ticket. Kristen Dorridge from Salesforce. And the third winner is Pat Yoshi of Kyocera. Congratulations. If you've heard your name read aloud on today's show, we'll reach out to you via email with some instructions on how you can claim your free ticket. If you have yet to purchase yours, check out the roster of presenters at contentstrategyapplied.com and definitely join us this October in Silicon Valley. And speaking of winners, we were going to give away a few tickets to our upcoming conference, February the 25th through the 27th in beautiful Palm Springs, California. We're returning to Information Development World 2020. We hope that you'll join us there. Here's the three winners that we're going to announce right now. Mark Forey from NetApp, you are a winner of a free ticket, as well as Chip Pashal of Extron Electronics, and the each of you will receive outreach from our organizers here via email on instructions and how you can claim your free ticket. I hope that you enjoyed the show today. My name is Scott Abel. I'm the host of the Content Wrangler series of content webinars. I hope that you had a good time today. Make sure to rate the presenters on the way out the door and let us know what you thought of the show. We really appreciate your feedback. Don't forget, you've been watching Powerful Strategies for Keeping Your Technical Content Fresh. There's some copy of the slides in the attachments and links section, and definitely there's some ways for you to reach out to Joe and Megan and ask follow-up questions if you'd like. So please do. I know that they always appreciate being contacted after a webinar. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Scott Abel, and I hope to see you at the next show. Goodbye.